All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the second class of The Art of Parenting. This is a course from JLI, the Jewish Learning Institute, which essentially focuses on sharing parenting wisdom and insights in how to raise our children based on Torah and texts in Judaism. So some of the things that we discussed in our previous class was firstly the ideas of why turn to Judaism in general for insight in parenting. And we looked at, from a historical perspective, how Judaism has a track record of over 3,000 years transmitting values from parents to their children for generations that has been proven to be successful. And it's also a course of study and an outlook that is timeless. It doesn't change over time. So this presents great advantages to us as parents, trying to understand what is the best way for us to raise our little ones to adulthood. The two main ideas and takeaways of last week's class, the title of which was The Parenting Principle, was to essentially lay the groundwork, the foundation for parenting from the Jewish perspective. And there were two ideas around this. The first one is that Judaism, unlike, for example, other cultures, where in other cultures, definitely in ancient civilizations earlier, until very recently, children were not the focus of parenting, and children had very little rights. Whereas in contrast, in the Torah, the child was always the focus of parenting. And this really has a lot to teach us, that when we're parenting children, our primary focus and perspective has to be thinking about what is best for our child rather than about ourselves. Even if when we ask ourselves, why do we have kids? A lot of the most common responses tend to be, if we're honest, selfish in nature. But in order for us to really raise our children well, we have to learn how to separate ourselves from our children. And this can be one of the most challenging aspects of parenting, of learning how to, rather than seeing our child as an extension of us, psychologically, making that point of separation. So yes, we are invested in our children. They are literally our heart walking around outside of our body. But in truth, they are not us. They have their own unique personality. They have their own unique mission to fulfill in life. And we cannot allow our own view to limit or formulate too much our parenting, because what we're supposed to be doing is thinking about how we can raise this child well. Now, there was a story that I wanted to share on this idea to open up with, which was actually one of the texts of the previous class. It's a story from the Talmud that is centered around one of the most famous Jewish women of that time period. If you have the text, the workbook, it is on page 6. So there's a story that is told of one of the most famous Torah scholars, his Talmud scholars. His name was Rabbi Meir, and he was one Shabbat. He was teaching in the academy his students. His wife was home with the children at Shabbat, and there was a tragic accident, and both of their sons died. His wife's name was Bruria, and she was a scholar in her own right, a Torah scholar in her own right, very famous woman. And she's home alone with her kids, and they passed. And she's at loss what to do. And she made the decision that she's not going to disturb her husband at the academy where he's teaching his students. She did not want to disturb his Shabbat. Instead, she brought the children to another room and she covered them with a blanket. You just imagine the grief that she felt in that moment, shock and trauma, but somehow she found the clarity of mind to approach this situation in this way. At the end of Shabbat, her husband came home, and before saying anything, she asks him, "My teacher, I have a question to ask. Before today, a man came and he left an item with me for safekeeping. and he has now come to collect it. Should I return the item or not? So Rabbi Meir, her husband, obviously says, I mean, of course. Isn't a custodian responsible to return a deposit to its owner? If someone gives you something, of course you have to return it. So she says, my teacher, if not for your words, I would not have been able to bring myself to return it. And then she takes him gently by the hand to the adjacent room, and she shows him their two children. And he bursts out in hysterics, crying about this. And she reminds him again, my teacher did not tell me that we are required to return our deposit to its master. God has given and God has taken. May his name be blessed for eternity. And later, one of the Rabbi Meir's colleagues commented about this story with those words, Bruria offered him solace and relief from the intensity of his grief. And therefore of her it is written, a woman of valor who can find. This is such an intense story, beautiful story, very poignant. But what the story really illustrates is this idea that our children are really on loan. They've been given to us on loan. God entrusts them and says, here, I want you to take my precious child, this diamond, and I want you to raise it for their, during the whatever many years that you have to be with them as a parent, to guide it, model for them and train them how to be a good, kind, righteous person. But our children are not us. And that's one of the first aspects of the parenting principle that we spoke about last week, is focusing on what's in the child's best interest rather than myself and my own discomfort or worries or issues. The second idea that we spoke about last week was about the importance of positioning ourselves in that family hierarchy of we are the parent rather than being the peer aunt, trying to be a peer, as we read about Anne Frank and how she described what frustrated her in her relationship with her mother, just really trying to cultivate and build that parent relationship where you're there to guide the children. And we spoke about the importance of parents training their children in the mitzvah of kibud av va'em. And just, if you got a chance, if you received the email follow-up to last class, if you got a chance to watch one of the videos that I shared, there was a beautiful story there that was shared by a rabbi who used to visit the Lubavitcher Rebbe's mother. And he describes a story where she confided in him one day, I want to tell you a secret, or not a secret, but I want to share something with you. I've never seen my son's back. And she basically described how he thinks I don't realize, but every time he leaves the room, he never puts his back to me. And he always tries to position himself, maybe he's fixing something, a picture frame, adjusting some furniture, but he always makes sure to move out of the room in such a way that I don't see his back. And that's really the ideal that we're striving for, to create a relationship with our children where they feel our love, they feel our connection with them, they feel that we're invested in caring for them. And at the same time, we are removed. We're not on the same level of them. We are their parents whom they hold in high esteem and high regard. So for today's class, we're going to be taking this idea, building on it, and focusing on the next aspect of it. We're going to be looking at the question about, is parent a verb or a noun? Is it something that we are or something that we do? More about what we mean by this as we go along. So we're going to start first with a story. This is a story that is shared by Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak. Okay, it is located on page 26. And this is the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he tells the following story. On Rosh Hashanah, 1887, when I was a child of 7 years and several months, I visited my grandmother, and she treated me to a melon. I went out to the yard and sat with my friends on a bench directly opposite the window of my father, That's the rabbi that you see here in the picture, Rabbi Shalom Dover of Lubavitch. And shared the melon with my friends. Father called me in and said to me, I noticed that you did indeed share with your friends, but you did not do it with a whole heart. He then explained to me at length the idea of a generous eye and a begrudging eye. I was so deeply affected by Father's words that I was unable to recover for half an hour. I wept bitterly and threw up what I had eaten of the melon. What do you want from the child? Asked my mother. Father replied, it is good this way. Now the trait of generosity will be ingrained in his character. And he concludes, this is education. So this story can, when you first hear it, it can sound very intense. I mean, what did the 7-year-old boy do? He did a wonderful thing. I wish I get a chance to observe my children sharing a melon with their, friends. What does it mean he did it with a begrudging eye? Okay, but this is the story. And remember, this is a narrative that is being shared by that child who grew up to become, an adult, grew up into adulthood, and he is sharing the story with a positive outcome. He said, this is the model of education, right? This for him was the ideal. So if we look at this, when you're hearing this story, okay, not this concluding statement, this is education, resonate for you, all right? Thumbs up, you can hit, I don't know if you know how to use Zoom, there's like a little emoticon on the bottom, you can put a thumbs up if you feel it does resonate with you, or no thumbs up at all if you feel it does not. Okay, I've got 1 thumbs up so far, 2 thumbs up. Okay, all right, so that's okay. This is an intense story, but there's something here that we're gonna unpack over the course of this class that can teach us something, because there's obviously something for us to learn. And really the question here is, does the situation, this story is written in the previous Lubavitch Rebbe's memoirs. He writes basically all of his memories, his personal life, stories from his childhood and throughout his life. So he's describing the story in his memoirs. Did it really warrant parental intervention? Why couldn't his father just, leave him alone? He shared his fruit, and even if he saw that he was doing it begrudgingly, okay, why did he have to intervene or even say anything to his kid? He was 7 years old. So we're going to circle back to this narrative and to this story in just a bit. But let's start first by asking some questions. I want you to take a moment, and either if you have the workbook, then on page 28, if not, on a separate sheet of paper, and take a moment to think about what are your primary goals in seeing your child grow up. You want to see your child grow up to be blank. Pick 3 things that you would really like to see your child grow up to be. And having goals is very important, because that's the only way that we can get anywhere. You understand now the why of what we're meant to be focusing on as parents, but let's talk about, goals. All right, anybody would like to share? Go ahead, I think you should be able to unmute yourself. Yeah.
To be a great person.
Okay, how? Like, what is a great definition of a great person?
To do good in school.
Okay. Good person and to do well in school. Anyone else want to share anything else?
I'll share.
Go ahead.
I'll share. I would like to be, hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. For my kids to be able to place themselves in other people's shoes. Because that's, I find that maybe a definition in my mind of somebody who's intelligent and also being a mensch.
Yes. So empathy. And empathy, you're right, empathy is the perfect combination of intelligence, and also emotional connection to other people. Because in order to be empathetic, you have to use your intelligence and imagination to try to imagine what it's like in someone else's shoes. So it is an
Right.
exercise. Yes, empathy. Anyone have anything else?
I could share.
Go ahead. Who volunteers? You can unmute yourself. Go for it.
Is that okay? Sorry.
You, yes.
Like to be content, like happy with what they have.
Okay. Good. So to be satisfied with what they have. Yes. Like they say, who is, as it says in Pirkei Avot, who is rich? Whoever is happy with their lot, satisfied and content. Good. Anything else?
I could share. Do you hear me?
Yes, Alicia.
Okay. I want my kid to grow up to be able to choose right over wrong. I want them to make good choices. And I think that if they can choose right over wrong in every situation, they're a good kid. And I did good.
And then you did good. All right. So being able to make good choices. Okay. Anyone want to share one more?
I can share.
Go ahead.
For them to continue to grow and to work on themselves when they're older, when they're already grown. That's how you know that you can let go, when you see that they're still working on themselves, even, by themselves.
So when they have this trait of personal growth and personal development, right? And they're really committed to like working on themselves. So there's two types of answers that we can have to this question. One type of answer is outcomes, okay? Like the end result, like, you might answer the question, I want my child to grow up to be, successful at school, a top student, right? It's an outcome. And then there is another type of response, which is values, character traits. Now, the truth is that when it comes to outcomes, a lot that goes into successful outcome, many factors go into that. Often, a lot of it is out of your control. It's out of our control as parents. As much as we want that outcome, there are many other factors at play. What happens if your child has a learning difficulty? What happens if there's other factors that are influencing their academic success, right? Or if I want my child to end up in a certain career, just giving examples. These are things that are really outside of our control. So while we may try to communicate those, transmit those, focus on those goals with our children, it's not so much within our actual hands to do that much about. But the other aspect, the other type of goal, which is a trait or a value, that is something that parents do have more control over. Even though, that being said, kids do sometimes not follow the values that their parents try to inculcate in them. It's the reality, but it is more within your control. Even something like, let's say, around school, if we focus on, let's say, if we transform that idea into a value that is more within your control, like, for example, caring about learning. So whether the child is necessarily going to get top grades or not, their focus is on learning. That's a value that's, you can transmit to a child. So that's an important, distinction to think about. Now, here's the other question, okay? Because this is really what we're trying to understand of how exactly what role do parents play in this? So now let's take the question another way and take a few minutes to think about what are the most important things that you learned from your parents? Okay, so what are things that you learned from your parents? And anyone who's ready to share, you can just unmute yourself and go jump for it.
My parents taught me to love, to give love, and be there for me anytime.
Yes, such a beautiful thing. How did your parents teach you that?
They were with me through difficult times, whatever I was going through. Anytime, a shoulder to cry on and just talk to them.
Right. What else? That's a beautiful one. That's a gift that you got from your parents. Anyone has something else that they would share about this?
To persevere. That you don't just give up when things get hard, that you have to find ways around obstacles, either around them or through them, and you can't just say, oh, it's too hard, and give up.
Yeah.
How did your parents teach you that?
I mean, a lot of us here are kids of immigrants. So when we came here, not speaking the language, not having a lot of money, all that, and you had to basically establish your life from ground zero and overcome anything that was thrown at you and establish a life that is meaningful and that is a legacy that you can pass on to your future generations.
Right. But you notice that amazing here that not necessarily down and talk, lecture you about the importance of hearing, but rather they demonstrated and model for us what those values look like. So they literally modeled for you, Alex, what it means to persevere, right? Day in and day out. Or when you're describing about how your parents taught you how to give love and to be there for another person, because that's what they did. They were there for you. Okay? Anyone else want to share another example of something that they learned from their parents?
I can. My parents taught me how to be kind, honest, hardworking, and independent.
And
Never to depend on anybody else.
Never to depend on anyone else.
On anyone else, yeah. Just basically by self-example. They've always worked hard. They were always very kind, very open to everyone they encountered. And independent, they've always told me you need to, get proper education in order to make a living and just, not depend on anyone else.
And were they independent? Or they just told independent?
They were very independent.
Right, they were also.
Yeah, definitely. I think the best example as parents is not what you say, is what you do.
Exactly. So it's like there's this quote that I saw once, not to worry so much about, don't worry that your children are never, like basically that they don't listen to you, but rather you should worry about the fact that they're always watching you.
Right.
Always watching you. So it's not about the necessarily sitting down, talking to them. Are they listening to me? I tell them this and this, but then they don't do it. The very first step is to actually, they're watching us and showing them by being a living example, what are these values that we want to, transmit to them. And these are things that are very mundane and day to day. Like there's a Hasidic tale that is shared of one of the students of the Maggid of Mizrich, where they were sitting around, all the students, and talking about, what they came to learn from, the great Maggid. And he said, all of you guys came to learn great Torah wisdom from the Maggid, and I came to watch how he ties his shoelaces. So he didn't mean literally, I came to learn how he knew how to tie his shoelaces, but he was saying, I want to see how he lives his day-to-day mundane life. How is he a mensch? Simple things, because that he wanted to learn that. I could go anywhere and learn Torah wisdom from great scholars. But that's really what our children learn from us, from the way that we wake up in the morning, all the habits that we have, how we tie our shoelaces, so to say. This is what they learn from all of this. Now, really, the question that we have is, how important is role modeling, and is it sufficient? And that's going to be the key theme here that we're going to try to understand. So yes, role modeling is very important, and it is key because our children learn from everything that we do. They learn how to use their phone by watching us. When we walk around the house holding our phone I would wonder, why are my little kids like constantly trying to get my phone out of my hands? And then I realized they're trying to be like me. So when they see it in my hands, they want it in their hands and try to explore and discover it. So this is really what children are doing. Now, we're going to let's take a moment and let's look at text 30, text 3. So there is this famous story in the Torah of Joseph. Now, Joseph, basically, he was a 17-year-old kid, and he was sold into slavery, goes to a foreign land, doesn't understand the language. He basically goes from being a beloved son who's, you know, the center of everyone's attention to the bottom of, you know, dregs of society. And he goes to the home of a very wealthy couple. And the wife, you know, he was beautiful, Joseph. He was 17, handsome, gorgeous, you know, kid. And she was very attracted to him. And she was constantly trying to basically get his attention and to persuade him, you know, she was trying to seduce him. And he never gave in. And there was finally one day when he just couldn't take it anymore. If you remember the position in society where he was far away from his family, from everything he'd ever known. And he had already decided that morning, like, okay, that's it. I can't stand it anymore. And at that moment, when she approached him again and tried to seduce him once more, she was always very clever in the ways that she tried to do it. And she actually threatened him that if you don't give in, then I'm going to basically report you to the authorities and you're going to be thrown in prison, because her husband was very influential, which is in the end what ended up happening. That's how Joseph ended up in prison. But if we look at text 3, we see here commentaries share with us two stories here. So Alex, do you mind sharing with us what prevented Joseph? Who gave him the strength?
Sorry, text 3 on page 30?
Yeah.
Rav Huna said in the name of Rav Matna, he saw the visage of his father Jacob and it cooled his blood. Rabbi Menachma said in the name of Rabbi Ami, he saw the visage of his mother Rachel and it cooled his blood.
So essentially what happened here, thank you. What essentially happened here is that in that moment, what held him back, what made him be able to make what we were describing before, the right choice, was he saw the image of his mother and his father. And just seeing their image, because that's essentially what we're doing with as parents, we are presenting an image, a role model of what it looks like to be the kind of person that we're trying to raise our children to be. When he saw that image is what basically inspired him to maintain self-control and to pull himself together and say, okay, I'm not going to fall into this temptation. And that's what did it. And we essentially are doing the same with our own children, to create an image in their mind that when they enter adult life, they will look back at it and say, okay, this is what it looks like to be determined. This is what it looks like to be spiritual. This is what it looks like to have faith. This is what it looks like to be a mensch, right? Just as Joseph saw his parents in this way. So another text that we have on page 31, text 4. Alex, do you want to continue? This is from the Talmud.
Sure. Do not tell a child that you will give him or her something and then not give it, for the child will thus be taught to say falsehood.
Thank you. So this is, on one hand, it seems like so simple and so obvious, but it's something that is so easy to forget when we talk to kids. Sometimes we think, hey, they're never going to remember, or we kind of try, we tell ourselves that this is for the child's benefit, but we sometimes twist the truth in some way. Even simple like things that sometimes parents will say, like, if you do this, then this is what's going to happen. And the thing that we're telling them is going to happen will never happen and is not possible to happen. Now, the Talmud is telling us right here, do not do that ever. Because what happens is the child will learn to tell a lie. And it doesn't matter the age of the child. One of the first rules to train ourselves as parents is to be so mindful that whatever we're saying is an actual truth. Because when we model this for our kids, we're teaching them that we have to be careful at every word we say is going to be a truth. When we tell kids, you need to be a man of your word, or you need to be a person who follows through on what they say, we have to begin with us, and we have to do the same. So even things like, when you're online in the amusement park and, your kid is almost the age, or they're almost as tall, and you just tell them, like just stand on your tippy toes. Simple things like that. That's like that story of like he was watching how we tied his shoelaces. That's what they're watching us to see. And it's really important to be cognizant of the model that we're presenting, even in those simple day-to-day situations. Now, in terms of modeling, what's also very important about this is that it forces us to put ourselves in a position of ourselves being someone who is growing and personal growth. And something that I often feel is not discussed enough in parenting is the idea that parenting is about personal development as a parent. Because that's what it's about. We also have negative traits and things that we wish that we didn't have. But the moment we take the perspective of, I don't want my child to have this character trait, then it forces us to reflect and think about it. Well, how am I going to change this in myself? So we see here this cartoon, where'd you get the idea that it's okay to smoke? The mom is asking the child who's coming up with a pack of cigarettes. Well, when a child grows up in a household where that's what's the norm, then that's where they're going to get the idea from. So just like with, when you're in an airplane and they tell you, parents or adults, put on your oxygen mask first and then put it on your child. When we observe or notice a character trait in our children that we wish would be different, the power of it, to really recognize the power of role modeling, the first step is to turn inward and ask ourselves, hold on a minute, where is this character trait within me? Do I have this character trait in some way? And how am I going to work on it in myself? So if, for example, I know that my child, let's say, is struggling with empathy, thinking about, one second, what is my child seeing? Am I modeling empathy? Can I model it more? Am I modeling it enough? If a child is struggling with anger, then is that something that I really can work on myself first? So beginning first with ourselves, looking inward. And what we also happens is that in doing so, we're modeling that characteristic that was mentioned earlier, that children will see that working on ourselves is a lifelong skill. That's what we do. We're constantly growing and trying to improve. But that's a separate thing that we're modeling. The first primary thing that we're modeling for them is that specific character trait. Okay, so now let's take this the other way, another way, okay? So yes, we need to, model. It's not about it's not about us, ourselves. It's about basically our child, and even trying to transform ourselves to help our children grow. But we also have some other wisdom, okay? Because one of the questions we want to understand is role modeling enough? What happens when we do know of parents, we can all think of examples, that really embodied certain values, but when we look at their children, they don't all have those traits, right? That happens. We can think of examples like that. So why does that happen? Or is there more? Maybe that's really the right question. Is there more to raising children than just being a role model? So we have this quote from Shlomo HaMelech from Proverbs, where he says that we have to educate a child according to his way, and that way, even when he grows old, he will not turn away from it. So it's not enough for us to role model a certain value and character traits, or let's say, expect that we're going to be the same parent for all of our children. We're going to be this one role model, and our children will just watch us, and they're going to know what to do. Because the word educate in Hebrew means chinuch. Chinuch really, it's hard to translate in English, but one of the best ways to do it is training, like really upbringing, raising, training, guiding. It's a very active role. So role modeling is in some ways a little passive. The child is observing you. Yes, you're working on yourself and you are modeling the behavior or the values that you want, but it's not as proactive. For children to really get the results that we want, there is a need for proactive parenting that is specifically tuned into the unique child's way, because that's the key here, according to his way. The child's personalities, what their needs are, and what's really going to stick with them. So we mentioned last week this next text. We actually referred to it last week, which is that the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, which that's the one who had shared the story with the Melon. So he actually has a quote where he says, "My father, Rabbi Shalom Dov Ber Lubavitch, once said," this is the father who basically had reprimanded his son for sharing the watermelon begrudgingly. So clearly education was a big theme in the family for his father and was very important to him. So he says the following, this is on page 32, text 7. "My father once proclaimed, just as wearing tefillin every day is a biblical mitzvah that applies to every Jewish man regardless of his standing in Torah, whether a great scholar or a simple person, so too it is an absolute duty for every person to spend a half hour every day thinking about the education of children. We must do everything within our power, and even that which is seemingly beyond our power, to inspire children to follow the path we envision for them." So here he's describing the next step beyond being the role model. What comes next? And what's next is really being, firstly, thoughtful, taking that time every day to reflect and think about the chinuch and education of our children, and specifically thinking about each child's unique needs, their unique way, and thinking about it, and then as he concludes the passage, actually doing everything within our power, and even what might seem beyond our power, to actually inspire our children. So why isn't role modeling enough to transmit values to our children? Why do you think this happens, that there are situations where, like, why can't we just rely on role modeling? Food for thought.
I mean, the kids are not you, right? Like, they're different personality, they have their different interests, and they don't necessarily will follow your footsteps and go into the same career or whatever it is. Like, they have their own ideas in their head.
Yeah. Yes, they're unique. They have they're individuals, absolutely, and they may not choose to follow exactly in your path.
Another thing, I know that for my parents, the way they raised us was always like they would let us make mistakes. They would let us learn from our mistakes. A lot of times, just watching somebody, it's very nice. I have my mother-in-law as my role model. I want to be just like her, but I'm not always going to do everything the way she does. That's just the way it is. Like, you want to be like somebody, but it doesn't mean that you're going to be like that. You have to, go through your own tests, your own things to figure out what works for you and what makes you great. Everyone's great in their own ways, and everyone has their strengths and their weaknesses, and you just have to, you have to let your kids learn the skills for themselves on how to be their own great, to bring out the best in them.
Exactly. So there's two really important points here that were touched on. One is that it has to be individualized. So it has these values while you're modeling how you imbue it and how you embody it. It doesn't necessarily mean that your child with their own unique ideas and personalities will know how to apply it to themselves and their own challenges and also their strengths. And at the same time, that there is also the aspect of skills and tools. So just because you're seeing somebody else do it doesn't mean that you can figure out now how you should do it, right? Actually having the tools to be able to do it. And that's really the key, why role modeling is not enough. There needs to be more. So here's just first like a challenge question, all right? Try to answer the question. When a child is born, he or she is most comparable to A, beautiful Rose, a delicate crystal, a holy angel, moldable clay, a wild donkey, all of the above with the exception of E. What would you choose? Okay, you can just think your answer in your mind. So do you want to hear what the Torah tells us based on Eov, the famous story of Job? Eov, what does he say? That a child is born as a donkey. Man is born as a wild donkey. Okay, sounds really insensitive when you look at this sweet, angelic little child. What do you mean? You're comparing this child to a donkey? Yeah. And there's a reason for that. So the reason is that the reality is that when children are born, all human beings, they're born with an impulsive nature. If you think about childish behavior, that when we watch a child doing those behaviors, we say, oh, it's so cute. It's adorable. Because it's okay for children to act like children. But when you see an adult copying those childish behaviors, not so cute anymore, right? Not so cute anymore. And in order to transition from children to adults, it doesn't necessarily happen naturally, that process of outgrowing that childish nature. This is something that actually requires education and upbringing to help a child basically learn how to acquire a new and more mature personality. That's what really the main objective of childhood is, to go from that, yes, cute, but also a little wild, lacking the ability to control itself, very self-centered, babyish nature that all of us are born from when we're children. And as we move towards adulthood, the objective is to basically shift from being very self-centered to learning how to be other-centered, to learn how to be, was describing before, having empathy, to put ourselves into another person's shoes, learning how to have self-control and work on ourselves. So all of the traits that we described earlier really link back to this maturing process, being content with what you have and not trying to grab everything, right? So this nature that we look at when we think of, this is what an adult looks like, children are not born with it. And actually, one of the unique qualities that make human beings special and remarkable over animals is that we do have the ability to learn and to be taught, both to work on ourselves and to be taught by others around us, how to basically learn how to control ourselves and to go beyond our instinct, whereas animals don't have that ability. So, and by the way, what's interesting is that animals don't even expect that, right? No mama bear is trying to teach its little cub how to have self-control. It's not a thing, but human beings do, because that's what makes human beings unique and special. So let's look at text 9 on page 35. This is a text from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, or Menachem Mendel Schneerson, and he shares what is the point of education. And he says, the whole point of education is to change the child's habitual nature. Children by nature do whatever they see fit without any restraints. Think of little kids, right? Little toddlers. In the words of the verse in Bereshit in Genesis, it says, the impulse of the heart of man is evil from. Okay? Doesn't necessarily mean evil like evil, but just it's not positive. We're just focusing on ourselves. Okay? We're egotistic and selfish. Children must therefore be trained to set boundaries and change their habitual natures until they attain sovereignty of mind over heart. So from the Torah perspective, in Judaism, the Jewish view of the way human nature evolves is that we are born with an egotistic, self-centered nature, and that our objective is to basically mature over the course of childhood to learn how to control this nature and basically to use this ability of self-control in a variety of different types of situations, that we face in our day-to-day life, so that we can basically evolve and become the best person that we can possibly be. So really, this idea is all about learning self-mastery and self-discipline. And if you follow any of the, role models of success that we have in the world, from, you know, great presidents to anyone who's been successful in sports. They all, their great quotes all evolve around one quality, which is self-discipline. So here we have a quote from, you know, Teddy Roosevelt. The one quality which sets man apart from another is not talent, formal education, nor intellectual brightness. It is self-discipline. And this specific quality is the starting point for all of the work that we will do and need to do with our children. It's all about learning how to control themselves. So if we're going to look now back, and here's another quote from Teddy Roosevelt: with self-discipline, all things are possible. Without it, even the simplest goal can seem like the impossible dream. And he's right. This is really the essence of all of it. And we see this, you know, reiterated again when we looked at the, you know, the Jewish texts, which are talking about what is the goal and objective of education. It is all about this specific quality, about self-discipline. Now, if we're going to look back now at some, like, let's say the earlier question that we asked of what are the outcomes of values we would want our children to have, and we think about them, there's a common theme here. We think of, you know, being happy, or other examples that parents might think, you know, social competence, empathy, knowing how to be good, kind, caring, making good choices, or even getting an education. There is one theme that is the root of all of these traits, and that is self-discipline. So self-discipline is really at the heart of what our objective as parents needs to be. And it can be one of the most difficult traits to train our children, because when they're born, yes, they're kind of like cute wild donkeys, or a little, you know, kid goats. If you have very active kids, right, they're just like always moving around. But teaching them how to have self-discipline is key. So how can we do this? But before we talk more about how, I think it's important for us to acknowledge three important aspects. It's not that we're trying to basically like mold the child in our image. You know, we're taking this child who's, you know, has energy, and we're trying to squelch them into this perfect, you know, polite, proper form of a child that has self-discipline. That's not realistic. What we're trying to do is a few things. Firstly, we're trying to reveal the child's inner godly soul. So while Eov says, Job in that quote, that a human being is born like a wild donkey, we also know that the Torah also says that a human being is created in the image of God, and a human being has a godly soul within them that is good, that is righteous, that wants to do the right thing. And our objective as parents, what chinuch, education, and upbringing is focused on, is revealing that inner godly soul, that inner desire that every child has within to do the right thing. They just may not necessarily know how to access it. They may have other things that are, you know, covering it up. They may not believe that they can do it, but that's what we're there to do, is to reveal that godly soul within them. The other thing that we want to do is we want to really, as was mentioned before, tune into the unique talents of the child. We're not trying to force them to be something that they're not, but rather to channel and develop their unique talents in a positive direction. Okay? And the third thing is that when children move from childhood to adulthood, we don't want them to lose behind some of the positive traits that children have. Like when we say something is childish, some childish traits are not positive, but there are some childish traits that are actually beautiful. Having a positive outlook, being able to laugh at silly things, you know, in the spur of the moment, the energy that children have. These are all positive traits. We don't want children to lose that completely. We just want it to be, you know, balanced out with other traits. So we want to reveal their godly soul. We want to channel and develop their unique talents, and we want to maintain their positive traits. So the gift of discipline. Okay, so let's look at, I believe, okay, we're going to look at a pretty controversial text on page 36. Elena, are you still with us? I think we may have lost her. Okay, if anyone is comfortable reading the text on text 10, page 36, anyone have it with them?
I could do it.
Okay, great. Okay, first of all, I have a background question. Anyone here ever heard of the Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mom? You ever heard of her? Can put a thumb up if you've heard of her. Okay, this was a really controversial book a few years back. Okay, go ahead.
What Chinese parents understand is that nothing is fun until you're good at it. To get good at anything, you have to work. And children on their own never want to work, which is why it's crucial to override their preferences. This often requires fortitude on the part of the parents because the child will resist. Things are always hardest at the beginning, which is where Western parents tend to give up. But if done properly, the Chinese strategy produces a virtuous circle. Tenancies, practice is crucial for excellence. Once a child starts to excel at something, whether it's math, piano, pitching, or ballet, he or she gets praise, admiration, and satisfaction. This builds confidence and makes the once not fun activity fun. This in turn makes it easier for the parent to get the child to work even more.
Thank you. So Amy Chow, who wrote this book in 2011, she basically wrote this book to kind of educate Western parents about the Chinese way of raising kids, which is the way that we should all be doing it. And it's like a memoir of how she raised her two children. They were, gifted, exceptional kids, did amazing, in academically. They played professionally in terms of like musical instruments, violin, really, really intense. So the book had mixed reviews. If you have the workbook, you can read in the additional readings. There's some critique of pros and cons of her approach, what was positive about, what was seen as positive and what was seen as negative. But there was a lot of uproar, like how she's torturing her children. She's not tuning into their emotional needs. And this is crazy. And it's so intense. And, she's destroying her kids. But at the same time, even her critics admitted that there was some value to what she was saying, which is that any success requires hard work. And that in order for children to be successful, we can't just focus on, I want to give my children a positive, happy childhood, but we have to make training our children to have the skill of self-mastery and self-discipline a priority. Now, I want to read a second text, which is a text from a rabbi that also talks about discipline. He talks about it in a little bit of a different tone, so you can compare, the two approaches, but he shares some very important insight into this idea of discipline with a Jewish tone, not Chinese, but Jewish, okay? So this rabbi is named Rabbi Manis Friedman, and he shares, discipline is usually seen as a necessary evil. You're young, you're irresponsible, you're ignorant, so you have to obey your parents. If you don't follow instruction, you might get hit by a truck or you might burn down the house. Isn't that how we talk to our kids? If you walk into the street, car's gonna hit you. If you touch the fire, you're gonna burn the house down. That's the way kids perceive discipline, right? You have to listen to your parents because, if not, the world will come to an end. If that's what discipline means, then naturally, as soon as kids get a little smarter, they start scheming. How do I get out of this? How can I outsmart my parents? Hasidic teaching sees it very differently. Obedience is not a yoke that you don't want. It is a talent that you never outgrow. Every human being has limitations and handicaps. Some people can't function before they have their morning coffee. Some people can't function after 8 o'clock at night. It's past my bedtime. I can't. When it's cold outside or wet, I can't. I'm not in the mood. I can't. There are 100 different things that keep me from functioning. All that changes when you have discipline. Look at a soldier. Soldiers are trained to follow orders, but more importantly, soldiers are trained to be free from all sorts of petty restrictions so that they can follow an order. Whether it's hot or cold outside is irrelevant. Uphill, down here, irrelevant. How much does the pack weigh? 40 pounds, 60 pounds, 80 pounds? Irrelevant. If it needs to happen, a soldier makes it happen. True discipline means freeing yourself, getting beyond the petty restrictions that limit average human beings and cause them to underfunction and underperform. So here's the key. Training a child through discipline does not mean I am going to impose my will on you because you're not intelligent enough to know what's right and wrong. Yes, there are things the parent knows the child doesn't, but there's much more to discipline than that. Let's consider the following scenario. You say to your child, put away your books. The child says, I don't want to. So you say, okay, but you still have to put your books away. What are you teaching your child? You're saying, you don't want to? But that's not a crippling thing. Do it anyway. You're training the child to go beyond his limit. So what we see here is that when we are disciplining our children, it's not about getting them to be obedient to us because we need them to be obedient to us. It's about training them step by step, moment by moment, how to have self-mastery and how to push forward in having the skill of doing what needs to get done, whether I'm in the mood of it or not. It doesn't have to be said in a harsh way. It can be said with gentleness, in a soft voice, calmly. This is what needs to get done, which is to let's say, get more specific. Things like chores, daily chores, cleaning up, helping your sibling, calling a grandparent. These are things that are presented and should be presented to children as, this is what's got to happen. This is the rule. This is what we do. And we're basically giving our children practical tools for how to go beyond our mood, our limitations, how we're feeling, just to get done what needs to get done. Because as soon as our children learn self-discipline, then they're able to be free to become whatever it is that we want them to be and what they can be, right? What they really can be to fulfill their true potential. So, let's actually look at one of the questions that frequently get asked when we talk about these things is, well, do I need to incentivize my child? Do I need to give a reward or consequence? It sounds great, okay, but my child's not going to listen to me just because I told them to. So let's look at text 13 on page 40, okay? This is a very interesting text from Maimonides, great, wise sage, doctor, Torah scholar, and he shares a very interesting text about raising and educating children, okay? He says, imagine a young child who is brought to a teacher to learn Torah, which is for the child's greatest good. But due to youth and immaturity, the child does not appreciate this. Anyone ever experienced that? You try to do something for your kid's benefit and the child doesn't appreciate it. So the teacher needs to motivate the child with age-appropriate incentives. So the teacher should say, read your lesson. Again, this was written in medieval times, so you'll notice the rewards are, they're not stickers and slinkies, or time on an iPad. Read your lesson, and I will give you nuts, figs, and honey. Okay, he lived in Morocco. He lived in Egypt. Towards the end of his life, he lived basically in that Middle Eastern region. So these are the kinds of treats that the kids would get. When the child grows older and the sweets are no longer attractive, the teacher should say, read your lesson and I will buy you nice shoes or attractive clothes. Then, as the child's mind reaches full maturity, the teacher should say, so you see how it evolves. Study and you will become a leader and scholar and people will respect you and rise in your honor. So the reward becomes more sophisticated. Now, all this is shameful. For the purpose of wisdom is not to receive honor from people, nor to bring monetary profits. This should not really be the motivation. We should study wisdom for no purpose other than to know it. Yet, this is for the children's good. for it gives them the motivation and gets them in the habit of studying and observing the Torah. And from this, they will be roused to know the truth and to do it out of love. Thus, our sages have said in the Talmud, we should study and observe the Torah, even if not for its own sake, because doing it for ulterior motives will eventually bring us to do it for its own sake. So what's so interesting here is that the Rambam is actually advocating for using external motivators as a tool to basically train children. Very often in education, I'm asked, like there's discussion, we shouldn't really be rewarding kids for things. But here we have it, right here, the Rambam says that, and he uses specific language, that it's for the purpose of creating a habit. Now, you shouldn't reward your children for everything. But when we're trying to train a child, specifically, and he just gave a specific situation where the child is resistant to it, then, depending on the age of the child, they need an incentive, and what the incentive will be has to match the child. They don't need, the child who can be rewarded with nuts, figs, and honey does not need to be rewarded with brand new clothes and shoes, right? Or a child who's more mature and sophisticated and can be, motivated by understanding, the honor that you'll get from this, even though that's not really the reason why you should be doing things, it's just to motivate them. And that eventually, the Rambam says, once we've trained them, then this will become second nature to them, and they will be able to maintain it on their own. Because the key here is, and we said that role modeling is not enough for a child to internalize values. Child needs to be trained. That's what chinuch is. It's training and giving the child tools. That's what a coach does. A coach shows you how you can do it. A coach doesn't say, here, I'm going to do jumping jacks. Now watch, or I'm going to do 20 push-ups. They show you how you can do it. They give you the tools so you can do it in your own way. And that's really the key of getting parenting to stick with a child even as they grow old. So it has to be direct to them, and you need to find ways to give them the tool, and incentive and motivation is a part of that. And eventually, the next time the child encounters the same challenge, they will know that, they could do it. Now, there's a very important aspect of this. It's not supposed to be just, here's the rewards. But when the child gets the rewards, that incentive for whatever it was that let's say, for example, you were working with them on a specific character trait. Let's say it's, being organized, or it could be even a midah, a characteristic, controlling anger, right? And if let's say you have a chart and you keep notes every time that the child held themselves in, and when they earn up a certain number of points, something that's within their reach, they then will get a reward. Once COVID is over, you'll take them to Six Flags or something even small. Go out for ice cream. Kids don't necessarily need big rewards. They want more time with you. Okay? Or they can choose a specific prize together with you that, you'll get on Amazon a week later. Just to give you some examples. The key here is the second aspect that we have here, is to make sure to point out to the child, and you thought you couldn't do it, but you did it. And to praise the effort. Praising that effort is a huge thing that now all the research, if you follow Carol Dweck, talks about the way that children learn grit and perseverance is because when they're praised for their effort. We say, I'm proud of you and your efforts, and you can feel so proud of your efforts. So we don't just give prizes, because then it does become an external motivator. But when we link that prize with an internal recognition of what it took, the diligence, the work that it took to achieve this goal, that's when the incentive actually helps the child begin to move forward in their own growth. So if we compare now these two ideas. We said being a parent as a noun. We are a parent. It's not just something that you do, you are. Just, being who you are, being a role model. What this does is you basically essentially giving our children the gift of proper values and perspective. So you see how, dad is washing the car with his kid. They're doing it together, but he's really modeling what it means to take care of, your possessions, and the values. And at the other hand, being a parent is also an active, proactive approach. It's something that it's a verb. You have to constantly do it. And here's the interesting point, important nuance. There's no moment when you're not parenting. From the second that your child is born, there's no off time. You're constantly parenting in one way or another, whether because your children are watching you or because you actually have to proactively parent them. And in this aspect of the verb, here, you're actually giving a child a tool of how they can act upon this actual value system. Okay, you're showing them how. Now, I want to take a minute just to talk about this aspect of proactive parenting, that the key that the balance that you want to try to find is there's a difference between being a coach and being a police officer. We go back to that text of Rabbi Manis Friedman when he was describing in the beginning of how parents, if it's all about, just being obedient because, I have to do this, otherwise I'm going to burn the house down, or, if you don't sit down, you're going to fall down and crack your head open. How many children have actually had that happen? It's not the reason why you can't tell your kids not to be jumping on the bed, but we don't necessarily need to use exaggerated threats. But point is that when we're being a police officer, then we find ourselves focusing on constantly enforcing rules for the sake of enforcing rules. It's not about the child. It's like, here, I'm a police officer, I need to give you a ticket. You were speeding, here's a ticket, right? It's not about helping to train the person how to have self-mastery. And that's what a coach does. A coach really, helps, and coaches push people hard. They're tough, but because, their team or, whoever they're training understands that they're doing it for their own benefit, and because they feel the care, they feel that it's not about me and I just need to enforce rules, but it's because I want to help you become the best person that you can be. It comes through, and it's different, and it has a totally different tone of a relationship. So that's one really important aspect. And it also changes the way that we communicate it. When you're a police officer, there's a way a police officer talks. And there's also a way that a coach talks. What a coach is focused on. It's not like, well, you're breaking the rules and therefore now I need to give you a consequence. It's, I'm trying to help you become the best person that you can be, and I want to help you get there. So therefore, sometimes there's going to be incentives, and sometimes there's going to have to be a consequence. So sometimes it may be that, if we're not going to clean up the toys, then I'm sorry, but tomorrow we're not going to be able to go out and play or do something else because first we're going to have to take care of this mess. And when you're doing it, it's not that you're trying to give a ticket out. It's because you're trying to teach your child a core value. And it's really for their own benefit. The other thing that's important to remember is that things take time. Rome wasn't built in a day. A child is not raised in one situation. Parenting, whether we're role modeling or proactive parenting, takes years. You have a solid 18 years, God willing, to really help your children gain those values and also build up those tools. So let's talk about next steps, okay? And then we'll take questions, thoughts, comments. So here's some next steps to think about. Try to think about a specific character trait or a habit or a value that when you observe your child, you feel like they need to improve. And the question here that we're being asked to think about is to turn the question around to ourselves. Put the mirror the other way and think, how can I improve myself in that same area? This is a tough one. I can speak from personal experience, and sometimes can put you in an uncomfortable position to have to really be honest with yourself of something that, oh wow, I really do need to work more on that. So pick one habit and think about, how can I really improve myself in this area? And the second is to identify one concrete rule or a goal that will help your child in that same area. So one is looking at the role modeling approach in parenting and strategy, and the second is looking at the coach training aspect of parenting, the verb. So let's say you've picked a specific value. What is a goal or a rule that will help my child in that area? Okay, calmly explain it to your child, and if necessary, again, depending on, you have to look at the needs of a child. Some children don't need a reward or a consequence in association with it. Some children do. So let's give an example. Let's take the example of getting angry or frustrated. So asking ourselves, like, how can I improve in this area? Like, how do I express frustration? And then sitting a child down and saying, okay, we're going to set a specific goal. Now, one of the important things that we're taught when it comes to working on character traits with children, this also comes from the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, the character of the story, which we'll get back to in a moment. So he describes, he has a whole book which is called The Principles for Education and Upbringing and Guidance. And he has a whole chapter on how to help a child grow in their character. And one of the first things he says is that you have to work on one thing at a time. So if you see a child has, a few things that they need to work on, choose the one that is the most important. So let's say, for example, he actually recommended honesty. Like if a child has a few, traits to work on, honesty, it would be something that's prioritized because honesty is a foundation for other things. So you have to, with your own parental wisdom, look at all the traits and choose one. And so let's say the trait we were talking here about, how we handle frustration. Okay, well, what is it exactly about? What is the specific behavior that how the child handles frustration that needs to be worked on? Maybe it's they're slamming doors. Whenever they're mad, they go to their room and slam a door. So it's not that they're going to the room that's the problem. Like, it's okay if they give themselves a timeout. It's the way they do it. They slam the door, the whole house is shaking. If you're living in a building, the neighbors up and down think that who knows what's happening in your house, okay? So you sit the child down and say, listen, I understand that, it's okay, it's normal to get frustrated, but here's what we need to work on. It's not okay to slam a door. And it's important to speak short and concise. Children don't need long lectures. They don't have patience for it. They don't have the attention span for it. And as soon as you start lecturing too long, they just tune out. So simple. Slamming a door is a problem. And explain why. It affects everyone in the house. The whole house is shaking, and it's not necessary, and it's not good for you. So if you're feeling mad or frustrated, it's okay to go to your room, but I need you to close the door gently. And then if you see, knowing your child, that there needs to be like either a consequence or a reward, you can decide whatever it is. And it's ideal if it matches the situation, whatever it is. So if it can be like, if you go slam your door to go to your room, you're actually gonna have to stay there longer because you did that, or something like that. Or if I see that you're able to go a week without, just going to your room and not making a whole big drama, then here's the reward that will come at the end. Or you may decide that that's not necessary. But let's circle back actually for a moment to that story in the beginning, okay? That story of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. And when he described how his father reprimanded him, and when his mother came to his defense to ask, why did you do that? And his father said, now I know that my child will have the trait of generosity. It will be instilled in him. So we can think about this story now from a little bit of a different perspective. This father saw his child. His child grew up to become, a great leader of the Jewish people. He actually led during the time of communist Russia, the entire underground yeshiva system, underground, kosher, shochtim, and really literally dedicated his life on behalf of other people, strangers. He, went to jail for this. His health was, his entire health was impacted by this. He put his life at risk throughout his entire life. So this father saw in his son the potential and also the need that this child would need to know how to be generous for other children. So even at the age of 7, he saw an opportunity that, yes, while he's sharing his melon, he's doing it begrudgingly. And I want to teach this child, I know my kid, I want to teach this child what it means to share with a full heart. He did not yell at him. He didn't punish him. He spoke to him. And he explained to him the idea. This is what it means to give with a generous heart. This is what it means to give begrudgingly. Now this child, if we go back to, let's say, the first lesson, our idea, like a parent putting themselves in a position where they are seen with prestige. This child took his father's words so to heart because he wanted his father's, he saw his father as such a role model that he took it so to heart that he really, he needed some time to recover from that. Now, obviously, this child is very unique. But there is something that we can learn from it, to not necessarily, okay, just because my child is doing, the basics, yay, I'm clapping, fantastic, well done. But to always look at what's the next step that my child can really learn a little bit more. Is there another aspect of their character traits that can help them gently, help them move forward and work on becoming their very best self? All right, so questions, thoughts, comments, dilemmas, things you're wondering about, like how can this apply to my children? Go for it. All right, fantastic. So that means, feel free to unmute yourself at any point and comment, but I hope that this will give you an opportunity to really think about yourself, how we can really help our children, raise the bar. And sometimes it can be, challenging, and really it can be challenging for ourselves because it also means raising the bar for ourselves, and try to really not only raise our children to be the very best people they can be, but to also be our very best selves. For next week, the topic is going to be on good authority, which essentially the main theme we're going to be looking at is, well, what happens when your kid says, I don't have to listen to you. Why should I listen to you? And go a little deeper into this concept of how to help our children learn how to be great listeners and how to apply that self-discipline and self-mastery in our like basically seeing parents as authority, but in a positive and Jewish way.
Thanks so much.
A pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Connie. Wow.
Have a wonderful
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.